They can engage in positive and pro-social acts with their friends. Maybe they just don't like this other kid in class, so this other group of kids in class doesn't like them, but they're very nice to their own peer group. So that could be a possibility for what's happening. They have friends, typically they are part of a peer group, but they might also bully other kids occasionally and engage in pretty calculated relational aggression to maintain their dominant status within a peer group. So then you have the neglected children. The neglected children, they, once upon a time, we thought that they were in need of an intervention. So the neglected children, they're the ones who are seldom mentioned. They're not really the kids that everybody says they like, or not really the kids that everybody says they don't like. They're just not mentioned. So we used to think that they were in need of treatment, in need of an intervention. However, we've started to come to realize that they're just as socially skilled as average kids. They just like to play by themselves. They don't really report feeling extremely lonely, or report feeling unhappy, and when they want to, when they feel the need to, they can break their routine of solitude and engage effectively with other kids. These kinds of kids, they do remind us that an outgoing, socially gregarious personality is not the only way to psychological well-being. Some kids just prefer solitude. Some kids just like to play by themselves. But when they want to, can be just as socially skilled as anybody else. Neglected children do remind us of that. Okay, so for gender typing. Let's go into gender typing a little bit. So kids' understanding of gender roles is broadening in middle childhood. So their gender identities are also changing a little bit. So the view of themselves is relatively masculine or relatively feminine. This is going to alter a little bit in middle childhood as well. So development also is going to be different for girls and boys, and it can vary pretty considerably across cultures depending on how traditional the gender roles are in that culture. Okay, so gender stereotyping of personality traits. It starts pretty early and is a kind of adult-like by around age 11. So children start to really associate words like tough, aggressive, rational, dominant with men and masculinity, and words like gentle, sympathetic, independent, and obedient as feminine sorts of words. So kids make these distinctions. How do they learn this? Well, based on their observations of the way that people act, as well as the way that people treat other people. So when helping a child with a task, a parent, especially fathers, are more likely to be more mastery-oriented with their sons as they set higher standards. They actually explain concepts a little bit more, and they point to important features of situations, especially ones that are more masculine-oriented. But parents are less often like this with girls. They less often encourage girls to make their own decisions, and they tend to actually praise boys for knowledge more so, and praise girls for being obedient more so. You're getting praise and reinforcement for different things. So school-age kids are starting to consider certain academic subjects to be feminine and masculine. So they say that reading and spelling and writing and music are more often for girls, and mathematics and science and mechanical skills are for boys. So they really do associate even subjects in school with feminine or masculine. These attitudes are really going to influence the children's preferences for and sense of competence at at certain school subjects. Boys, they tend to feel more competent than girls in math. Girls tend to feel more competent than boys in literacy. This is true even when kids of equal skill level are compared. So even if they're all making the same grades, boys are still going to say that they feel better about math. Girls are still going to say they feel better about literacy sorts of things like reading. Kids are aware of many stereotypes, and they develop a more open-minded view of what males and females actually can do. So in the preschool years, they thought that gender stereotypes could not be violated. Boys just do not paint their fingernails. Girls just do not play with G.I. Joes. Early on in preschool, they thought that these things can't change. But they get a more flexible ability to classify things at this age. So they have a more flexible idea of what boys and girls can do. So they realize that a person can belong to more than one social category. They understand that someone might be a boy, but also like to play house occasionally. But by the end of middle childhood, they do regard gender typing as a socially determined thing rather than a biologically determined thing. They realize that this is what's girly and this is what's like a boy because of society rather than because of the biological makeup of a person. But acknowledging that people can cross gender lines is not the same thing as approving of it. Just because kids know that it can happen does not mean they approve of it happening. So they very much so take a harsh view against especially little boys when they violate gender norms. So maybe a boy who plays with dolls or paints his fingernails or wears a girl's clothing, that is going to really be something that can get you rejected from a peer group pretty quickly. And something like a girl playing really rough or being very hostile and acting very noisy, that's going to be something that's more tolerated out of a boy, and little girls might not want to play with her because of that. So they're especially intolerant for cross-gendered behavior in boys. That kids, actually, little boys regard cross-gendered behavior out of other little boys almost as nearly as bad as breaking a moral imperative, like stealing something or hitting someone. There's a difference for boys and girls in the pattern of their gendered beliefs. So from 3rd to 6th grade, boys actually tend to more so identify as masculine. Their identification as masculine actually gets much stronger from 3rd to 6th grade. But girls' identification with feminine traits actually gets weaker over time. So their identification with mostly feminine traits is going to decline over the school age years. Compared to boys who are more so likely to pick mostly masculine activities and pursuits, girls, they start to experiment with a wider range of options, career choices, considering different career choices, and also behaviors and things that they like to do. These changes do reflect a few things, so both cognitive and social forces. Kids are aware that society attaches more value to masculine traits than to feminine traits. Being self-sufficient and assertive and ambitious is most likely all the time going to be more societally important and looked more favorably upon than being dependent and obedient and sensitive and nurturing. That's what you're going to see. Parents, especially fathers, are more tolerant of girls crossing gender lines than they are of boys. It's actually easier for a tomboyish girl to make her way into boys' circles or to still remain friends with girls than it is for a boy to really still be able to hang out with other boys if he also likes to hang out with girls and do girl things. It's more difficult for boys. This is one area where boys kind of get the short end of the stick here. While boys do strengthen their identification with masculinity, girls actually decrease their identification with femininity. As children make social comparisons between the genders and start characterizing themselves in terms of more stable and enduring traits and dispositions, gender identity is going to expand to include self-evaluations that are really going to affect their adjustment. They're going to start making these evaluations, these self-evaluations, that can play a big role in their development and that have to do with gender. First is gender typicality. This is the degree to which the child feels similar to other kids of the same gender. Kids don't need to be highly gender typed to be pretty good off or to view themselves as gender typical. But we do know that to some extent their psychological well-being, at least to some degree, does depend on feeling that they fit in with kids of their same sex. At least to some extent, gender typicality is kind of an important thing, or feeling that you're at least a little similar to other kids of your same sex. Next is gender contentedness. Gender contentedness is the degree to which the child feels satisfied with his or her gender assignment, and this can also promote happiness. So this is really where if you are a little boy, do you feel like you should be a little boy, or do you feel like you should be a little girl? Or if you're a little girl, do you feel like you should be a little boy? So those sorts of things. How content is that child with their gender assignment? So next is felt pressure to conform to gender roles. So this is basically the degree to which the child feels parents and peers disapprove of his or her gender-related traits. So do I feel that I'm a kind of a girly little boy or a more feminine little boy and nobody likes me because of that? Or do I feel like I'm a pretty masculine little boy and everybody likes me because of that? So this is just how much pressure a child feels from everyone else. So the more pressure can reduce the likelihood that kids are going to explore options that interest them, maybe in work roles and maybe in activities and things like that. And it can feel pretty stressful for the child, especially when they feel that their peers and parents don't approve of their gender-linked traits. So how children feel about themselves in relation to their gender group becomes very, very important in middle childhood. So just the effect of other people becomes just a lot stronger. So those who experience rejection because of maybe gender atypical traits are going to suffer pretty profoundly. Kids who are rejected because maybe they are gender atypical, they're going to suffer quite a bit. So currently, researchers and therapists are not really sure the best way to go about this. Some people say that they should, and kids who are gender atypical or feel discontent with their gender assignment, to actually advocate using therapy that they more so conform to gender typical behavior. So this would be where they encourage and reward the child for engaging in gender appropriate behavior or gender typed behavior. So they say that through this therapy and through reinforcing the kids for engaging in the gender typical behaviors, that what happens is that they're more so going to feel compatible with other kids of the same sex. However, though, other people say that this approach is not really going to be good for the kids at all because it's going to increase pressure to conform to something they feel that they are not. And we know that that is linked with later adjustment problems as well. For kids who fail to change, this can result in kind of a rejection by parents, a parental rejection, and peers. So it might not be a good thing there. So these experts are kind of advocating for actually going in and intervening with parents as well as peers, other kids in the classroom, to sort of be okay and more accepting of the child's gender atypical traits. So this is a more large-scale type of intervention than just trying to change the child. Okay, so there are a lot of important contexts for gender typing that kind of occur. There are family influences. So school, peer, and community contexts are going to kind of go into the way a family relationship changes. Kids' parent-child relationship is going to change during this time period. So there are going to be new things that parents have to consider and deal with. At the same time, though, the child's well-being does continue to be invested in the quality of family interaction. So having a good, stable family life. So contemporary changes in families, like high rates of divorce, remarriage, maternal employment, have had some influences on kids, so both positive and negative. Parent-child relationships at this point. In middle childhood, the amount of time kids spend with their parents drops off pretty sharply. So it goes down pretty dramatically because they're in school now. They're going to school for the majority of the day, and they may ride the bus home, might be at home for a little while, maybe a couple hours until mom and dad get home from work. This independence means that parents are going to have to start dealing with some things that they maybe didn't have to deal with in the past. So how many chores to assign, how much allowance to give their kids, whether the friends that they're hanging out with are good influencers or not, what to do about problems in school that they might have, keeping track of the kids when they're not at home, where are they, who are they with, and what are they doing with those people. Also, even keeping oversight of the kids and knowing what they're doing when they're at home alone. So there are lots of different things that parents have to start dealing with at this point that they didn't have to before. Child rearing is going to be easier for parents who have established an authoritative parenting style earlier on. So reasoning is going to be more effective with kids in middle childhood because they have better logical reasoning ability themselves. They can understand a little bit better why rules are there. So effective parents are going to engage in co-regulation with kids. So this is a form of supervision where parents exercise general oversight. They're the ones who are ultimately in control, but let the kid be in control of their moment-to-moment decision making. So they're really the final source of decision making. They're the final say so, but the kid gets some leeway to make the moment-to-moment decisions. This grows out of a cooperative relationship between parents and children. If you've established that trusting relationship, that sensitive child rearing style early on, the parent-child relationship is going to be better and more stable in middle childhood. And what you're going to see is that you can trust them a little bit better. They're going to follow direction a little bit more, and it's not going to be as difficult on you if they do kind of mess up or get into trouble. Then it's going to be a lot easier to reprimand those children because there has been a very strong supportive bond there between parent and child. Parents tend to devote more time to children of their own sex. They also tend to engage in different activities. With kids of different sexes, mothers are typically more concerned with caregiving. Dads are more concerned with other sorts of things. As fathers, especially with sons, are more likely to focus on achievement-related things, whereas mom might more so focus on making sure the children meet their responsibilities, like doing their homework, after-school activities, chores, that kind of thing, talking about emotions. When both parents are present, fathers engage in just as much caregiving as mothers do. Although school-age children often press for some independence, for more independence from their parents, they still know how much they need their parents. So even though they might want to be a little bit more independent at this point, they still know that they need their parents. In one study, they asked 5th and 6th graders to describe who was most important to them in their lives. They would say mom and dad, most influential people in my life. They also said they turned to their moms and dads for affection, for advice, for enhancement of self-worth, to feel good about themselves, for assistance in everyday problems that they had. So they still know that parents are very important. Okay, lastly here, sibling relationships. Siblings are a very important source of support for school-age kids, especially in middle childhood. But sibling rivalry increases a lot in middle childhood. In middle childhood, the elementary school year, sibling rivalry increases. Kids, as they participate in a wider range of activities, parents are going to become increasingly more likely to compare siblings on traits and accomplishments. So if they're both in the elementary school years, 2nd grader making straight A's, 4th grader not doing so well, and they reward 2nd grader for kind of getting better grades, don't reward the 4th grader. 4th grader's aware of that, and they're not going to like it, and they might kind of have some rivalry and conflict there with their sibling as a result. Sibling rivalry is almost inevitable most of the time. Even if you have kids that really get along, the more they're together, the more opportunity there is for conflict. Some rivalry is unavoidable. A kid who gets less parental affection at this point or more disapproval from the parents are likely to kind of be resentful of the kid who is getting more of those things. And for same-sex siblings who are very close in age, for same-sex twins and that kind of thing. For same-sex siblings who are very close in age, parental comparisons tend to be more frequent because the kids are more similar. This can result in a lot more quarreling between the kids and more antagonism and poor adjustment. This effect is particularly strong when parents are under stress, which leaves them with less energy to try to make sure that they are being fair. It's less, obviously parents are people too. The more stressed out a parent is, the less energy they're going to have to deal with kids, and being fair between siblings is sort of the same. To reduce rivalry, we see siblings themselves actually doing some of these things of their own free will. So they tend to strive to be different from each other. They tend to actually want to be quite different from each other, and they shape important aspects of each other's development. So for example, two brothers might deliberately choose different athletics to be involved in because they don't want to be compared to each other. Or maybe if they're both in band and they select a completely different musical instruments to play to avoid being compared to each other. Especially if the one is older and one is younger, but they're still kind of close in age. If the older one is really good at something, typically that younger one is not going to want to do that. If the older brother or sister is really good at basketball, then that younger sibling is typically not going to want to play basketball. They might want to play a different sport or might get involved in a different activity. But typically, you're going to see that they're going to avoid comparison as much as possible. Parents can limit these effects by trying to make an effort not to compare their kids, but some of it is inevitable because, second grader who makes straight A's versus a fourth grader who doesn't, should that second grader not be rewarded because of the grades of her older sister? Absolutely, she should be rewarded. So some realization of a comparison is inevitable. Conflicts do arise. Although they do arise, siblings still value the support they get from each other. So even though they do get mad at each other from time to time, there is some rivalry there. Siblings still are going to really benefit from knowing they can rely on each other for support, especially support at school. But for siblings to reap these benefits of support from each other, parental encouragement really needs to be there. You should really get along with your brother, or don't be mean to your sister, that kind of stuff. So, really encouraging them to get along. Everybody, we are going to stop here with chapter 10. So I appreciate watching these videos. I know they can be kind of broken up, but I hope that they were helpful. Email me with any questions that you have, and if you're having problems, try first emailing Jeff, the TA, because he'll be better able to answer questions faster while I'm in Mississippi than I will be. So try him first for your questions, and then if he can't figure it out for you, then you can go ahead and email me and let me know. Okay? So hope everyone has a great week, and I will see you hopefully next time as Dr. Southard.